With so many companies starting to implement social networks within their organisation, it's a bit surprising that so many of them fail to measure the success of their adoption scientifically. Instead, they rely on subjective measures like, is it working and do we feel better connected? These emotional measures are useful and interesting, but they need to be backed up with hard numbers if you're to measure success accurately. One of the main reasons people don't measure adoption in this way is because they're not sure what the most meaningful measurements are and what benchmarks they should be aspiring to reach. Here, in the first of a two-part series, are 10 suggestions of the metrics you should care about. Number 1. The percentage of active network members. Of all the people you invited to join your social network, how many are actually logging in? It's the most basic indication of whether your network is successful. If people aren't logging in, none of the other metrics here really matter. Ideally, we want to reach 100%. How achievable that is depends on whether you invited just the people who really must participate, or a wider audience of people who you hope will join in. What we want to see here is an upward trend, although don't be discouraged by an initial peak while people log in for the first time to see what it's all about, followed by a short-term decline. That's normal as the initial excitement of the new network wears off, but look for the decline to be short-lived and for participation levels to recover swiftly. Number 2. Contribution per user. How much has the average user contributed? We don't want the majority of members to just be lurkers, we want them to contribute. Like the percentage of active members, we would expect to see an initial peak, a short decline, and then steady improvement. It's also useful to look at a more granular level and separate the creation of contents and comments, as this says a lot about how the network is being used. For example, high content creation levels with low commenting suggests members are perhaps still thinking in an old broadcast-style model of content management systems, rather than interacting with other members. Low content creation and high commenting levels suggest the network is perhaps dependent on too few creators. A healthy network will have the two in balance. Number 3. Most active users. Who's contributing the most? Of course, some users will contribute a lot more than others, and it's important to recognise these people and reward them. But there's more to this than just giving out badges or awards. These people are critical to the success of the network and can quickly become community champions who illustrate best practices to other members. Ideally, you'd see active users from a range of departments and groups, rather than everyone being from the same team. But even if one team is far more active than the others, then that's useful to highlight. Number 4. Participation inequality. Considering the average user can be dangerous as it fails to account for extremes of behaviour. For example, a very few active users can compensate for a large number of inactive users. This is known as participation inequality, often referred to as the 1% rule. There are many different ways of measuring this. Typically, I measure the percentage of users who contribute 90% of the total network activity. A successful social network needs to encourage participation from as many people as possible. In a truly equal network, 90% of the activity would come from 90% of the participants. You're unlikely to achieve that. For internal social networks, I would consider figures under 10% to be poor, over 30% to be good, with most networks falling somewhere in the middle. For external, customer-facing networks, the figures are typically much lower. Number 5. Non-contribution. How many members are contributing nothing at all? We need to look beyond the distortion caused by participation inequality and identify those members who are not contributing. This is likely to follow the same initial peak that we saw before, as many users will start by just lurking. But the number of non-contributing members should then start trending towards 0. Reaching 0 ought to be entirely achievable. In part 2, we'll look at 5 more things to measure with a particular focus on how members of the network interact with each other.